Coming from someone who never pursued animation, yet is passionate about the art form and the zeitgeist of entertainment culture, it's odd to discover its different shifts and dynamics amongst different groups of people. At the start, animation was approachable to general audiences and was seen as such until the advent of television in the 1950s. While live-action shows were breaking into new territory, animation became more discernible to childlike innocence and awe. Because if you can remember the most prevalent and groundbreaking pieces of work in the 60s, can you see any animated feature released in America to come to the same grade as something like Lawrence of Arabia, Bonnie and Clyde, Virginia Woolf, or To Kill a Mockingbird? It wasn't The Man Called Flintstone, let me tell you that. Even Walt Disney, a business mogul, America's family-friendly conservative persona, had his concerns that his prestigious marquee had dug him and his film output into a hole with no escape. Sword in the Stone and Jungle Book were not game changers by any stretch, and after his death, the Walt Disney Company was sidelining their own animation business in pursuit of live-action films. In a strange butterfly effect, animation was both taken for granted by the more profitable mediums, yet also drew in artists and animators to experiment with the formula. Because with animation, you can do anything live-action can't. And with the birth of the internet, it only grew more influential as time moved on. As Theodore Levitt said, creativity is taking up new things. Innovation is doing new things. With the help of computers, animation has crossed new horizons and given birth to new stories and ideas fully expressed through the freedom of the pen, and it's the source of possibly one of the best animated shows to come out in the past decade, that was on the way to truly leading cartoon programming to a whole new level. Infinity Train. Infinity Train is a truly great show, and despite its episode lengths of over 10 minutes, the treks amongst its wildly imaginative train cars and the journeys followed by characters of multiple backgrounds were shattering the mold that most shows aimed at younger audiences couldn't quite break through. But when it seemed to finally make its mark in history, the break. And like that, it was all over. So the big question is, why did a show of such massive potential and admiration from fans big and small get the axe? And is it truly denying chances for animation to be more than what its peers view it as? Or could it just be the longing hope of some person's soliloquy to justify his life choices and not come off as a closed-off loony maverick? Or maybe I just need a number to start this whole program. The inventor behind this multi-dimensional locomotive that never stops is none other than Owen Dennis, an animator slash storyboard artist who dreamt up this show aimed at kids as something inspired by his feelings of waking up in an unsettling space, a place unaccustomed to what he thought was true, and a presence that never seems to subside. Tracing back to when he was an English teacher in China, there's this part of the ocean that's really big and quiet, and it's very still. The plane was flying over that section, and I'd woken up. I looked around and there was a bunch of people staring into the screens in the dark in this quiet room. I thought this was kinda creepy, and it sort of started from there. Soon enough, he started to draft ideas for a movie which later turned into a TV show that plays a person into a seemingly inescapable realm that will only let them go if they pass its vaguely defined undertakings. Setting is a train that never stops, and its cars contain creatures, objects, and matters in their own pocket dimensions who wish to either help, impede, or kill our main hero. Think of it like those old 80s child fantasy shows like Labyrinth or Neverending Story, but with an added pinch of Event Horizon. It doesn't go to the point where it would scare the daylights out of kids, but it wasn't sugarcoating the dangers either, even with the colorful environments and charming characters to suit those moments. Yet the true nightmares are in the states of our main characters, who must navigate their past misdeeds and heartbreaks to come out the other end ready for the future. Cartoon Network picked up the pilot for the show and aired it on their social media channels in 2016. Garnering the most views for a single pilot episode since its debut. And by 2018, the show went into full production with 10 episodes for its first season, centering around the perennial child herself, Tulip. Season 1 starts with Tulip Olsen, a kid from Wisconsin who has an interest in game design, yet can't go to her anticipated game design camp due to a schedule conflict with her parents. Thus, she takes matters into her own hands and runs off into the flatlands, until a train crosses her path and she gets on board. When she awakes, she is trapped on a train steamrolling across a barren wasteland full of creatures that can suck out her life essence, and with a number that goes up or down without an answer. Yet with the assistance of a robot named 1-1 and a quirky crowned king, she ventures through the many odd and whimsical cars to get herself back home. What makes the show interesting from a first-time viewing is how fairly down-to-earth situations feel, and how it can present the state of affairs surrounding our heroine with such relatability. A lot of kids growing up, like Tulip, can understand the hardships of their parental figures growing apart, and the negative effects it can have on a child's self-worth. The disappointment, the anguish, the uncertainty, misinterpreting the problems, and believing that they are the ones that are to blame. In episode 5, Tulip is hooked into a machine that plays out her memories from way back when, and paints her childhood as being happy and full of wonder, like her visits to SeaWorld, and seeing Word Up by Cameo in the car with her parents, who both love each other. No, seriously, it's the actual song she even sang in the episode prior.
Young pretty ladies around the world got a weird thing to show you, so tell all the boys and girls.
But it starts to unravel upon taking a closer look and what lies behind the curtain that she put up herself. It was a mental block to hide the fact that every important development in her early stages hid fragments that combined to reveal the painstaking truth of it all. Those conversations. That night Dad slept on the couch. It was coming. And she can't admit it because it would mean accepting the fact that things are never going to be the same.
Things change, but our love for you won't. We just want you to understand.
I understand perfectly! Things were fine, but then you decided to change everything!
Tulip has felt distressed during this transition, which can be reflected in other characters as mirrors to her situation. 1-1, the little robot that has two personalities, has an irrational urge to fix what's broken, culminating in a moment in episode 6 where he tries to correct a car and nearly collapses it. Tulip goes to help 1-1 and triggers this response.
There isn't a fault. It just is. But all this, you trying to make it your responsibility? This is causing real harm. I know what it's like to think that if you had just been better, things would have been different. That you're responsible for fixing things that are beyond your control. Just know that I speak from experience when I say, this is not your fault.
The theme of the first season ties into acceptance and growing up, represented through several characters, big and small, as well as the main antagonist, the conductor, whose revelation is something I'll talk about later in the video. Tulip's journey across the many cars makes her stronger mentally, including a candid conversation with her literal reflection.
Skipping text from Michaela, pretending you couldn't hear Mom because, sorry, I was just so busy making my game. Just go away, Tulip. That's what you do best.
And after experiencing the surreal landscapes of the cars and the cybernetic engine room that is the creation of all these pocket dimensions, we have stood on the heels of someone who really is truly ready to face what lies ahead. Now, the show plays very much like any episodic cartoon show that airs on Cartoon Network, and it has a limitation of only being 10 minutes in length per episode. But the amount of detail, foreshadowing, and growth that is written into each episode is truly something unreal. And big props also goes out to the animation team for realizing these imaginative planes of existence, from an empire housing talking corgis to a house of mirrors with its own laws and regulations. For a first outing, the only question on everyone's mind when that portal opens up and Tulip goes back to the real world is, where can the show realistically go? What can Infinity Train be without the main character that started it all? Well, she didn't have her reflection by the end of season 1. Let's see what they've been up to. It's pretty rare to see an animated TV show go off the typical path and be its own anthology series. The only show I can think of in recent memory that did this was JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, which was adapted from a manga from the late 80s. So the reveal that we're following multiple characters' adventures through seasons opens up a whole new world of possibilities. And with the second season, Mirror Tulip, who goes by MT, is on the run from the Mirror Police and comes across another passenger named Jesse. They, accompanied by a shape-shifting deer named Alan Dracula, go on a trek through the cars, all while finding their own portals off the train. Simple task for a passenger, but not a denizen. Denizens are designations of the train's infinite possibilities, and are purposely made to help travelers face their problems and get them off the train. Yet they aren't like passengers and can't be seen as such. They are programmed to stay on the train for eternity, and MT is frustrated by this. As such, they are more hesitant to serve their function, and willingly try to achieve their own objectives by themselves. But when Jesse comes in, they slowly open up and offer their support in his plight of being a pushover and needing to stand up for himself. He, in return, presents a rational reason to leave and be on their own out in the real world, taking their stance as not just being a simple reflection of Tulip, but their own person.
Not foil, I'm not reflection, I'm not a sliver, I'm not a null, I'm not any of the hundreds of names that everyone wants to give me. I'm my own person who is getting off this train.
In fact, most fans consider this an allegory for gender transformation and trans identity, which, while not intentional, does offer fascinating insight and strong representation.
Choose to become a disgusting fleck like you? Coward. You're a coward! When your prime died, you chose to be a fleck because you were afraid to let go of your identity.
The ideas and implications are clearly read as a story of rebellious youths fighting against a system that won't allow them to be who they are, and the threats are real and widespread, even among other passengers. One of the more interesting antagonists, aside from the mere police officers, are a group of teens forming a group called the Apex. They believe in a false truth that Amelia, the first season's antagonist, is the true conductor, and that to support their idol is to claim dominance over the cars containing denizens and kill them all to restore order. Grace and Simon have the highest numbers of any passengers they know of, and believe that the higher they go, the more they're entitled to their positions of power. And seeing that they oppose fraternizing with denizens, they're hostile to our protagonist and their overall significance, calling them null as if they're nothing to them. And it results in some of the most dramatic and intensive scenes in the show up to that point, finally ending with a last-minute act that rewards them with a portal to Earth, and to finally look into their own reflection. Season 2 is a trip that delves into how diverse and complex the bizarre creatures, demi-humans, and objects are, and that the discovery of who you are is ultimately what will carry you later in life. Despite not centering around the first season's protagonist and having only brief cameos from the previous supporting characters, Infinity Train proves that you can still bring out great characterization and storytelling without the need for coherence or structure. It clearly was designed with the anthology in mind and gave the setting a real sense of place. With several doors open for the series to go, it's only fair the next season would take it a step further into what I consider its darkest chapter yet. I feel like I'm not alone in how the Book 3 of Infinity Train, titled Cult of the Conductor, is possibly the most complex and engaging season yet, as it takes antagonistic characters Grace and Simon and shines a whole new light onto them. The plot is well laid out, and every character, small and large, passenger or denizen, greatly shifts the balance between heartwarming sentiment to the pure psychological fracas. It plays like the other two seasons, with the focus now centered around the Apex leaders, navigating across the train back to their home base with a little girl and her denizen in tow. As they try to get rid of the gorilla denizen, they slowly start to learn more about themselves. One finds commiseration towards the people she's harmed, while the other begins to melt into the fractured mind he's left to rot for too long. Grace and Simon start off as malicious and apathetic teenagers who only look out for the group's safety and their overall stance in the totem pole, though Simon sees lack the finesse and leadership that Grace naturally possesses. Once Hazel and Tuba are introduced though, Grace's habit of lying and manipulating others seems to fall off after her relationship with Hazel becomes stronger, while their bond with Simon shatters. In fact, the way she speaks to Hazel by the halfway point is quite the opposite, going from mere condescension and sarcasm.
That way we can teach you all about numbers. Maybe we can get yours to glow like mine does.
To emphatic and remorseful when her defenses shatter and leaves her vulnerable.
No, Hazel, it doesn't have anything to do with you being good or bad. It's not like that.
Her fears of isolation and letting people down, however, are the demons she faces. And when pushed to make a decision, it costs her the trust and friendship of those she cares for. Simon, on the other end of this umbrella, is giving troubling signs of his mental state breaking. He looks up to Grace and is always trying to prove himself to her, by never straying away from the values of their cult, a group they formed only because of Grace's false truths about the conductor's legitimacy. But each bombshell revelation begins to unravel his idol, and with no one to turn to and seemingly all of his friends leaving him alone, then it seems to him that being the highest number in the Apex is the only way for him to feel important again. Empathizing with denizens of what caused him trauma, so in the instances where characters relate to his emotional center, he takes it upon himself to snuff it out and remain the lone pack leader who is never wrong. Hazel and Tuba are the catalyst to the Apex co-leader's shift in empathy, and represent the heart of Infinity Train. They both found happiness in each other, with Hazel being the closest thing to a child of Tuba, making her maternal and protective attitudes a hazard for Grace and Simon to cross. And when that line is crossed with Simon sending Tuba to the wheels below, the secret behind Hazel's true origins is revealed, and the rest of the story is just our anti-heroes going on their separate paths before clashing in a death match for the future of the Apex. To say this goes dark is an understatement, and the scenes in question are quite a step up from anything seen on any cartoon show aimed at kids. Where the first 2 seasons were setting up its environment and characters, which is not unexpected from other Cartoon Network shows, Season 3 is revolutionizing the way some can see network cartoons as. And the method I'd use to truly understand and exemplify this level of storytelling would be to cross it with another story of desertion and savagery, Lord of the Flies. William Golding's famous 1954 novel was published at a time when the long-forgotten subgenre of British boys on a deserted island was still popular among juvenile fiction sections. It usually involves proper English-speaking boys battling the jungles, being cooperative and polite, and being white gods to native inhabitants shunned for their savagery by the proper white man culture. The biggest one by far was R.M. Ballantyne's novel The Coral Island, where 3 young boys shipwreck on an island and hijinks ensue, which ends with the racist depictions of Polynesians converting to Christianity and the boys living happily ever after. Yeah, this book has not aged well over the years. So much so that Golding, distraught from serving as an officer in World War II, went and drafted up a slap-in-the-face lampoon of Coral Island, where a war is going on in the backdrop, and the boys act less like proper chaps and more like actual children in that they really some shit up. Lord of the Flies has since then become a literary classic and has been the basis for one good film by Peter Brook, one bad film by Harry Hook, several stage adaptations, including a gender-bent one called Ladies of the Flies, and inspired works mostly in the forms of Battle Royale, Hunger Games, and every dystopian novel you read in the early to mid-2010s. And when it comes to Season 3 of Infinity Train, it has some loose connections to the story that makes the character stand out, while also mixing elements of Peter Pan with the Apex, being fairly reminiscent of the Lost Boys. But the most important element is the lack of an adult figure, with the only one being Amelia, basically the sailor who appears at the end of Lord of the Flies that berates the boys and how royally they themselves. But the major themes are still there, and are the reasons why this season is probably the best yet. One of the major themes is civilization versus savagery. The boys in Lord of the Flies are scared by the prospects of the beast of the island, an unknown that seeks to harm them at night, and despite the discoveries that it was simply a dead parachutist, the others become paranoid and begin to act more violent towards the truth.
The rules, you're breaking the rules. Who cares? Because the rules are the only thing we got. Bollocks to the rules. We're strong. We hunt. As a beast, we'll hunt it down and beat and beat.
In Infinity Train, the beast is the false conductor, and the kids are seeking to destroy the cars and denizens that dwell within them to gain favors. Both groups rely on power and violence to survive and remain strong, turning down any bargains from their perceived enemies. Jack and Simon are characters who project their savagery from their need to project strength and hide their insecurities, carrying out the most vicious acts in their stories. And while Grace doesn't meet eye to eye with Ralph's more collective attitude, once she begins to understand the truth of things, she begins to desire a need to bring back civility to the Apex. With no adult figures to latch on to, the older children begin to develop antisocial and destructive behaviors, thinking that excessive force and rank are the way of the world. Simon clearly shows signs of bipolar and schizophrenia, yet Grace is clearly not the one to help mediate or control those disorders. Kids simply aren't well equipped enough to manage a society of logic and are more emotional in their takes. And the eventuality that you'll create someone on the level of Simon or Jack, then it's safe to say you've created a band of savages rather than an organized union. The second theme is the loss of innocence. By the end of Lord of the Flies, the death of Piggy, the torturing of Sam and Eric, and the overall pandemonium around them destroy the inner child within all the survivors, and they weep on the beach over their shattered dreams and futures. In Infinity Train, Hazel is the embodiment of innocence, and her jolly and passionate nature in the cars is the opposite compared to the cynical Grace and Simon. But even when Hazel's caretaker and best friend is murdered, the ones who feel their purity lost the most are Grace and Simon. Grace is disturbed by the actions that Simon displayed in Tuba's demise, becoming mournful and realizing that her hands are dirty from the years she spent destroying the lives of those she thought of as lesser. Simon takes it upon himself to relive the memories of betrayal from the cat denizen named Samantha, and lapses into abrupt discovery around Grace's deception, resulting in him doubling down his cruelty and abandoning his empathy for power.
We've been doing it wrong. We can still change.
Why would I ever want to change if I'm always right?
Oh!
And that's not to say that Hazel isn't distraught by these shatterings of her innocence, but at the same time, she is also the one who matures the most, setting up a funeral for Tuba and deciding to leave Grace and Simon because of their duplicitous actions are signatures of her evolution as a person and not just an ordinary null. She grows up and makes rational decisions better than ones that are older than her, who have wasted their youths prattling around cars for their selfish desires. Yet in a small way, she still held on to a fragment of her childlike wonder, even when she made grown-up decisions. Childhood is built to grow out of, and while not too late for Grace to embrace and find joy in again, for Simon, it's a bridge already too damaged to walk back to. And finally, there is the theme of humility. Grace's pride and arrogance are the catalyst for Simon's anger, ego, and malice. She believes in the lies she feeds people and is rightfully punished for them when Hazel leaves her despite her protests. She doesn't want to feel alone, so she manipulates and puts herself in a position where everyone needs her. Yet what she needed was to be more truthful in her words and to become a more modest person.
I'm afraid. Afraid of being wrong, of disappointing others, of not being enough. I did everything to avoid being alone.
The highest number shouldn't make you better than everyone else. It is that lack of understanding that cost Simon his life. In Lord of the Flies' case, the civility and teamwork for the boys begin to fall apart almost immediately when Jack starts hailing himself as the food provider, resulting in the signal fire burning out within minutes away from help reaching them. Without order, there is less instruction and more instinct, and Ralph has to battle that throughout the novel and must face his former group alone once his only source of camaraderie and mutual attachment is slain, and he's left on an island of self-conceited barbarity. These are just the closest themes I can pick from this comparison, yet are emblematic of Infinity Train's aptitude for characterization. The depths beneath this friendly aesthetic is haunting to look into, but by the end of the story, you are satisfied with the result. And it's that excitement that got a lot of people talking and theorizing for what comes next. Now, if you're expecting another big analytical comparison between an allegorical novel and a kid's television show, then Season 4 might be letting you down on that end. It's pretty good still, with two friends named Minji and Ryan who get on the train and must resolve their shattered friendship while also being chased by denizens. A fairly well put together season, yet more in line with the tone of Infinity Train's humble beginnings. Owen Dennis even admitted during an AMA on Reddit that he wanted Season 4 to be subverting fans' expectations of what Infinity Train was already about. And yeah, good on him to keep audiences in check sometimes, but maybe not that good with the benefit of hindsight. But before we cross into that train car, let's talk a little bit about the season and what it provides to the series. Minji and Ryan start the season out as best friends who both dream of breaking out into the music industry. Their love for rock and roll gets them motivated to practice and audition for what could be lifelong careers. But on the day of one of their school's talent shows, hindered by the overzealous burden of his home life, Min walks out on Ryan and he goes on stage without him. This gets the duo to split up and years later, get into a scuffle that lands them both on the train. With their party also taking on a hotel belle named Kez, the two have a difficult time trying to amend their past mistakes, as well as getting to the bottom of what Kez did to many of the denizens who were out for the team's heads. For Min, he's a down-to-earth and earnest worker, seeking approval from his parents for doing things their way. He believes in what his parents believe in. Staying on the path and never straying from the line will make you a successful individual. Yet that leaves him unfulfilled, and just following the unset rules of society pushes what he values down into the dirt. So much so that he is against any actions Ryan takes during their quest, calling them moronic and completely inept. As for Ryan, he pursued the life he wanted and came out the other end chewed out and flat broke. And with no partner in crime to back him up, he couldn't fall back or find inspiration again. He is short-sighted and leaps without a care in the world. If anything, this mentality is probably the biggest flaw he needs to correct, as he abandoned his only best friend in their pursuit of music. He was the one who ran away from his friend and left him behind. In the 7th episode, his number reaches 0 when he admits his mistake and has a chance to go home. But in that instant, he is about to leave his friend behind again, and the door closes. Ryan is the direct cause of Min's abandonment issues, whilst Min is the pin to Ryan's place in the world. Even their misadventures throughout the cars are pointing to working together as a team. From making a recipe for a big baby voiced by J.K. Simmons, to putting a song together for an astronaut nightclub, showing that only together can they make the most of their lives worth living, for better or for worse. But then there is Kez. What's her damage? Why are all these denizens after her, and what did she do? By the time episode 8 rolls around, we discover many key things about her life before Min and Ryan. She had another passenger in her life that also lived in the same car with her, and after getting his exit through unexpected means, she feels guilty for that, and even makes the sentient castle upset over her actions. This in turn gives people the impression that she doesn't care about their feelings, and she will sometimes ignore them just to be away from all the emotional distress. And her character arc concludes when she finds that some mistakes need to be atoned for, while the biggest ones should not be.
Anyway, he told me he was driving one night and it was super foggy and this car came at him head on because the driver couldn't see. His mom and sister were in the car with him and they died. So I told him it wasn't his fault. He nodded, but I could tell he didn't believe it, so I was like, okay, but for real. And then all I said was, I think even though you live here, you never really left that fog.
It's similar to how Tulip shouldn't feel responsible for her parents splitting up, or Grace and how her influence wasn't the source of Simon's clinical narcissism. They're not the problem, and viewing themselves as that will not solve anything. Simon gaslighting Grace is more an indictment of his overall personality than a product of Grace's manipulation, and Kez's talk with her former friend about the deaths of his loved ones is exactly what he needed to hear. The phrase, "never leaving the fog," isn't meant to twist a knife. It's supposed to enlighten and free one of the burdens of their mistake. She did what all denizens were designed for, and whether it be a simple "I'm sorry" to the folks trying to destroy her, or a practical discussion about letting go, she has become more sure of herself, and that rings true to Min and Ryan as well. Season 4 is a lot more of a codependent reunion tour than a full-on descent into the traumas of rebellion. It still has its place in the lore of Infinity Train, and it establishes things like the gravity boost worn by Simon, and one allowing passengers to even keep their personal attires for identity. It even is a good turning point in how Amelia eventually took over the train and abandoned the needs for the passengers who were more likely to die without guidance. Not quite on the same level of development as the previous season, but still another stellar. Wacky, but still integral to the principles of Infinity Train's overall message. So now it's only fair to tell you why I feel conflicted with the season ending. Because it was advertised as the final one. Unlike the first two seasons, Season 3 and 4 aired on HBO Max, and speculation began to arise in the production of future seasons in general. The show was already on the cusp of this plug being pulled, and it all revolved around the numbers. Infinity Train could get picked up for more, but only if it gets a lot of views on HBO Max. If the show gets picked up for more, then I'd love to make more and hire back as many people as we could. If it doesn't, then I am but tears in the rain. Interesting that Owen went with that Blade Runner line, but more to the point, numbers were not the issue for the show getting cancelled. It actually got great viewership scores across the board, and according to Observer Media in 2020, was the 4th most watched original series. So the reasons behind Cartoon Network giving it the old pink slip was more to do with the show diverging from a child entry point, especially when it came to the script of a 5th season's movie. Amelia would be the central character for the movie, and plans even included heavy themes that not all younger audiences would fully get into, which was never a problem considering the audience for the show was skewing more to the older demographic anyway. Yet the stigma still remains that animation isn't an art form that folks take seriously enough. You can see it during this year's Oscar ceremony for Best Animated Feature,
because animated films make up some of our most formative movie experiences as kids.
Or just a few weeks ago on Cartoon Network's Twitter account, disregarding it as something to grow out of if you're an adult. It's never an easy thing to admit out loud to a group of people that you like cartoons or anime, and I've experienced this lots of times before. Infinity Train is quite comparable to Raised by Wolves, an HBO show also pushing the limits of what can be done on television and with a dedicated following until it abruptly got cancelled. In a post-Game of Thrones world, television is incorrectly doubling down on big-budget affairs just as it slowly backfires and sends them into financial straits. Just look at Netflix as a great example of this. Infinity Train is simply a project that never yielded the subset of animated television programming, and because of that, the uninitiated saw an opportunity to stamp it out or risk their bottom line. In the end, that's show business. Then again, this can't be the end of the line. Ever since Infinity Train was given the final nail, animated shows have been seeing an uptick. From big studios like Disney releasing The Owl House and Amphibia, to previous projects getting their big breaks like Dead End, Paranormal Park. These shows still hit that sweet spot between entertaining the younglings and the adult populace while acknowledging or embracing trends that are pushing a new standard to meet. Yet there is still work to be done. Historically, companies don't like risk-taking, and that is seriously hurting the course of some of these shows. Especially The Owl House, as despite gaining outstanding ovations and a Peabody Award for its efforts, Disney abruptly cancelled it and marks another red X in their studio rep. Well, not the biggest one, mind you, but still hurts for all those Lumity fans out there. The long-standing power of Infinity Train's influence on the animation scene still lingers on, and more folks like Owen Dennis are needed to showcase the overall potential of it all. So the train might be temporarily closed for maintenance, but in this guy's humble opinion, it's only a matter of time before those wheels start to move once more. Thanks so much for watching, you guys, and tell me your thoughts about Infinity Train after over a year of it ending. Please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to watch my uploads whenever I feel like it, because I'm lazy and love to write 5 different scripts that may or may not ever be made into a video. It's your bra man, on a trek on my favorite train.